The lawyer placed a folder on my kitchen table and looked at me like I was already guilty. "My client believes you have an obligation to share your inheritance with the Carter family," he said. Across from him, my mother-in-law smiled. It was the same smile she had worn at my wedding 6 days earlier. Polite, elegant, almost affectionate. Now it looked different. I glanced at the folder, then at Evelyn Carter. "You came to my house with a lawyer," I said quietly, "to ask me for money." She crossed her arms. "Not just money, Claire. Family money." My heart was pounding, but my voice stayed steady. Because there was something neither of them knew. They had no idea how much money I actually had, and they certainly didn't know what my father had instructed me to do if anyone ever came asking. "My name is Claire Morgan. I'm 32 years old, a captain in the United States Army, and until that morning I had been trying to convince myself that marrying Michael Carter had been the right decision. 6 days earlier, I had stood beside him in a small church outside Washington, D.C., surrounded by family friends and a handful of people from my military life. My father wasn't there. General Daniel Morgan had been gone for 11 months. He had been a 4-star general before retirement, a man who had spent more than 4 decades serving his country. To most people, he was disciplined, intimidating, and impossible to impress. To me, he was simply Dad. He had taught me how to fold a uniform properly, how to keep my word when nobody was watching, and how to stay calm when everyone else was losing their heads. But there was one lesson he repeated more than any other. Never tell people what you have until you know what they value. I had never fully understood what he meant, until my wedding. Michael knew my father had left me an inheritance. He knew there were investments and property involved. I had told him that Dad had arranged things before he died. But I never told him the number. Not even once. The number was $68 million. It wasn't money I believed made me better than anyone else. It was the result of decades of investments, family holdings, and assets my father had carefully protected. The inheritance was held in a trust structured by attorneys my father had known for years. And Dad had left very specific instructions. The money was mine, not Michael's, not his mother's, not anyone else's. Mine. I had kept the amount secret because I wanted one simple answer. Would my future husband love me if I had nothing? For the first year we dated, Michael gave me every reason to believe the answer was yes. He never asked about my salary. He never complained about my military schedule. When I had to leave for training, he brought me coffee before dawn and told me he was proud of me. That was the man I thought I knew. His mother was different. Evelyn had always been gracious in public, but there was something calculating beneath her manners. She asked questions that sounded harmless. "What did your father do with his investments? Did he leave you the family home?" I always answered vaguely. Michael usually changed the subject. So, when I married him, I thought the secret was safe. 6 days after our wedding, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when the doorbell rang. Evelyn stood outside. Beside her was a man in a dark suit carrying a leather briefcase. "Good morning, Claire," she said. I looked at the man. "Who is this, my attorney?" My stomach tightened. "Why we need to discuss your inheritance." I stared at her. She sat at my kitchen table as if she owned the house. The attorney opened his briefcase. "I'll be direct," he said. "Your marriage creates certain financial considerations, not where my inheritance is concerned." Evelyn leaned toward me. "Your father was a powerful man. He understood family obligations." I almost laughed. My father understood boundaries. Her expression hardened. "Claire Michael is your husband now. What belongs to you belongs to the family you married into." "No," I said. "That's not how inheritance works." The attorney slid a document toward me. "There's a proposed financial agreement here. It would establish shared access to certain inherited assets." I didn't touch it. Instead, I looked at the top page. There were details about my trust. Details that only a handful of people should have known. My mouth went dry. "How did you get this information?" Neither of them answered. I looked at Evelyn, then I looked at the attorney. Finally, I asked the question that mattered. "Did Michael tell you?" Evelyn smiled again. That same wedding smile. "Michael doesn't need to tell me everything," she said. A cold feeling moved through me. I reached for my phone. I called my husband. He answered after the third ring. "Hey, Claire." "Michael," I said. "Your mother is here with a lawyer." Silence. Not surprise, not confusion. Silence. Then he whispered, "What?" I closed my eyes. "She's asking me to sign documents about my inheritance." Another silence. Longer this time. And in that silence, I realized something that hurt more than the lawyer, more than the documents, and more than Evelyn's entitlement. Michael knew something, maybe not everything, but something. "Claire," he finally said, "maybe we should talk about this when I get home." I looked at the woman sitting across from me. Evelyn was watching my face carefully. She already knew. She had come prepared. And suddenly my father's final warning came back to me with painful clarity. Never react when you're angry. Never reveal what you know. And above all, never show your enemy the full battlefield. I opened my eyes. "Okay," I told Michael. "We'll talk when you get home." Then I hung up. For the first time since my wedding, I wasn't thinking like a newlywed. I was thinking like my father's daughter, and I knew the next move mattered. By the time Michael came home that evening, Evelyn and her attorney were gone. I had spent the afternoon sitting at the kitchen table with the documents spread out in front of me, reading every page without signing a single line. The more I read, the worse it became. The agreement wasn't simply asking me to share my inheritance. It would have given Michael access to financial information, created joint control over certain assets, and opened the door for his family to argue that the money should be used for household and family obligations. It was written in polite legal language, but I knew exactly what it meant. Once I signed it, getting that control back would be difficult. I heard the garage door open around 7. A few seconds later, Michael walked into the kitchen. He looked tired, or guilty. I couldn't tell which. He set his keys on the counter and looked at me. "Where's my mom gone? And the lawyer gone too?" He nodded slowly. I watched him remove his jacket. "You knew they were coming." He stopped. "I knew my mom wanted to talk to you." That wasn't my question. He looked down. I knew she was upset. "Michael." He finally looked at me. "Yes." The word was quiet, but it landed heavily. I pushed the documents across the table. "She brought this." "He didn't touch them. I didn't know she'd bring a lawyer, but you knew she was going to ask about my inheritance." He hesitated. "Yes." I leaned back in my chair. For a moment I couldn't find the right words. Not because I was surprised, because I was disappointed. "When did you find out? A few weeks ago?" My chest tightened. "A few weeks," he nodded. "How?" "My mother heard something from one of your father's old business associates." I stared at him. "That makes no sense." "Why?" "Because the amount was confidential." He looked away. That tiny movement told me more than his answer could have. "You knew the amount, didn't you? You knew it was substantial. I knew your father had left you money." How much? Michael didn't answer. I stood. "How much did you know, Claire? I don't remember." I almost smiled. "You don't remember hearing about $68 million. His face changed. There it was. The reaction I'd been waiting for. He knew. Maybe not every detail, but he knew the number. And suddenly the last few weeks of our marriage looked different. The questions about my father's estate. The strange conversation he'd started about buying a bigger house. The way his mother had recently asked whether I planned to continue serving in the army after we started a family. At the time I had thought they were normal questions. Now they felt like pieces of a puzzle. "Did you tell your mother the amount? No. Did you tell her anything?" Michael rubbed his forehead. "I might have mentioned that your father left you more than we expected." I closed my eyes. More than we expected. Those words bothered me, because he had just turned my inheritance into something that belonged to both of us. He looked at me. "What you said, we expected." I didn't mean it that way. "How did you mean it?" He couldn't answer. I walked toward the window. Outside, our quiet suburban street looked completely ordinary. A neighbor was bringing groceries inside. A couple walked their dog. A teenager was shooting basketballs in a driveway. Nothing had changed, except everything had changed. I never told you the amount I said. I know. Why didn't you ask? Because I didn't care. I turned around. Then why is your mother asking me to sign a document giving you access to it? He looked ashamed. I didn't ask her to do that. But you didn't stop her. He sat down. For the first time, I saw fear in his expression. Claire, my family is struggling. I said nothing. My parents have debts. My mother thinks your inheritance could solve everything. Could she thinks families help each other? That's not what this is. I know. No, Michael, you don't. My voice remained calm, but I could feel the anger underneath it. Your mother didn't come here because she wanted to welcome me into the family. She came here 6 days after our wedding with a lawyer and information about my private trust. He looked down. I know. Do you? Yes. Then tell me how she got it. He was silent. That silence lasted long enough for me to understand that he either knew or had a very good idea. I sat across from him. Michael, I need the truth, not the version that makes your family look better. He swallowed. My mother has been asking questions. What kind of questions about your father's estate? When before the wedding? My heart sank. How long? Maybe 2 months. 2 months. While I had been choosing flowers, arranging seating, and trying to balance my military schedule with wedding preparations, his mother had been investigating my inheritance. Did you know, at first I thought she was just curious, and later I realized she wasn't. What did you do? He looked at me. I told her to leave it alone, did she? No, I stood again. Why didn't you tell me? Because I was afraid. That answer stopped me. Afraid of what? Losing you. I looked at him for several seconds. You should have been more afraid of losing my trust. He lowered his eyes. That night, I didn't sleep beside him. I took a blanket to the guest room and closed the door. But instead of crying, I did something my father had taught me during my first year as an officer. I separated facts from feelings. Fact 1, Michael knew about the inheritance. Fact 2, his mother knew the amount. Fact 3, a lawyer had prepared documents. Fact 4, someone had obtained confidential information about my trust. And Fact 5, Michael was not telling me everything. The next morning, I called my father's estate attorney, Robert Hayes. Robert had represented my father for nearly 15 years. He was one of the few people I trusted completely. When he answered, I didn't waste time. Robert, someone has information about my trust. There was a pause. What kind of information? The amount, the structure, details about the assets. His voice became serious. Did you disclose anything to your husband? No. Then we have a problem. I thought so. Claire, I need you to come to my office. I drove into Washington that morning. Robert's office was in an older brick building where my father had spent countless hours reviewing contracts and estate documents. He closed the blinds before speaking. Someone attempted to access your trust records last month. I stared at him. Who? We don't know for certain. Then, how did you know it was an attempt? Because the request came through a third party using information connected to your husband. My stomach dropped. Michael. We can't say he personally made the request, but someone used his information. Yes. Robert opened a file. Then he removed a sealed envelope. This was left by your father. I recognized the handwriting immediately. My father's handwriting. Robert looked at me. He gave me strict instructions. I was not to deliver this unless someone attempted to interfere with your inheritance. My fingers trembled as I reached for the envelope. What does it say? Robert's expression softened. I think your father expected this day might come. I looked down at the seal. For 11 months I had avoided opening anything that made his death feel real. But now, holding that envelope, I understood. My father had not simply left me money. He had left me a warning. And whatever was inside that letter could change everything I thought I knew about my marriage. I broke the seal with my thumb. For a few seconds I couldn't bring myself to unfold the paper. My father's handwriting was unmistakable. Strong letters, slightly slanted, precise. The same handwriting I had seen on birthday cards, military commendations, and handwritten notes he'd left on my kitchen counter. I finally opened the letter. My eyes landed on the first line. Claire, if you're reading this, someone has tried to get access to what I left you. I stopped breathing. Robert quietly closed the office door. I continued reading. Do not confront them until you understand what they're trying to accomplish. My father knew me too well. He knew I would want answers immediately. He knew I would want to call Michael, confront Evelyn, and demand an explanation. Instead, he was telling me to wait, to observe, to think. I kept reading. The money is not the important part. The people who reveal themselves because of it are. My vision blurred. I had heard those words in different forms my entire life. Dad never cared much about money. He cared about character. He had grown up in a working-class family in Pennsylvania long before anyone called him General Morgan. He used to tell me that his first military paycheck felt enormous because at 19, he had never had much money of his own. He believed money should give you freedom to make good decisions, not permission to make careless ones. The letter continued. I chose you as the sole beneficiary because you have demonstrated something I cannot buy or teach with money restraint. I swallowed hard. Then came the sentence that made my hands tremble. If someone attempts to convince you that marriage automatically gives them control over this inheritance, remember that inheritance and marital property are not the same thing. Get independent legal advice before signing anything. I looked up at Robert. He knew. Robert nodded. He knew there might be a problem. He was concerned about people around you. Who? Robert hesitated. Your father never gave me a name. I looked back at the letter. There was more. I have also asked Robert to preserve records concerning several financial inquiries made by people connected to individuals who may eventually approach you. If that happens, don't assume the person standing in front of you is the person controlling the situation. I read that paragraph twice. Someone connected to individuals. Not one person. People. My stomach tightened. Then I reached the final paragraph. Claire, you will be tempted to think you can solve this by giving them enough money to make the problem disappear. Don't. Once you pay someone who believes they are entitled to you, there will always be another demand. I folded the letter slowly. For the first time since my father's death, I cried. Not because I was afraid, because I missed him. I missed the certainty of having someone older and wiser in the room, someone who could look at a complicated situation and reduce it to one clear question. What is right? Robert handed me a tissue. He loved you very much. I know. He was proud of you. I wiped my eyes. I just wish he'd told me more. Robert smiled sadly. He probably thought he had. That sounded exactly like my father. I took a breath. Show me the records. Robert opened another folder. Inside were copies of several inquiries made about my trust. One had been submitted through a financial consultant. Another had come from an attorney's office. The third had been made through a property company. And attached to the third request was a name. Carter Family Holdings. I stared at it. That's Evelyn's family. Robert nodded. Your mother-in-law's husband owns several commercial properties. The company has been struggling. How badly? Robert slid another document toward me. I read the numbers. Millions in debt, outstanding loans, tax liens, a pending foreclosure on one property. I looked up. How long has this been going on? Several years. I felt something inside me go cold. Michael had never told me, neither had Evelyn. Robert continued. There is something else. He handed me a printed email. The message was between two people I didn't recognize. The subject line read, Claire Morgan Marriage and Trust. I read it. The writer discussed the possibility of convincing me to combine my inherited assets with marital finances after the wedding. One sentence stood out. Once she's married, she'll be more emotionally vulnerable to pressure from her husband. My hands went numb. Who wrote this? We're still investigating. Does Michael know about it? I don't know. I closed my eyes. I wanted to believe he didn't. I desperately wanted to believe that. Because despite everything, I still loved him. That was the most painful part. If I hated him, this would have been easier. But I didn't. I loved the man who had waited outside the airport for me after a deployment delay. I loved the man who had once told me that my uniform was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen me wear. I loved the man I thought he was. And now I didn't know whether that man had ever really existed. I drove home that afternoon without calling him. When I walked through the front door, Michael was sitting on the couch. He stood immediately. "Where were you at my attorney's office?" His face tightened. "Why? Because your mother brought a lawyer into our home. I know." "No, you don't." I placed my purse on the table. "I know about the financial inquiries." His expression changed. "What inquiries don't?" I had never spoken to him that way before. He stopped. "Claire, did you or your mother try to access my trust? No. Did you give anyone information about my inheritance? No. Did you know your family has millions in debt?" He stared at me. "Who told you that?" That wasn't an answer. I felt something break inside me. "You did know. I knew about my parents' financial problems. And you still let your mother come here asking for my money. I didn't know what she planned to do. You knew enough." He ran both hands through his hair. "I was trying to protect everyone. Everyone except me." He looked wounded. "That isn't fair. Neither was what happened." He stepped closer. "I love you." I wanted to believe him, but love wasn't enough anymore. "Then tell me the truth." He looked down. "My mother has been talking about your inheritance for weeks. How much does she want?" He didn't answer. "How much? Enough to pay off the family debt?" I stared at him. "That's millions of dollars." "I know, and she expects me to give it to her. She thinks you should help." I shook my head. "No, she thinks you should help her convince me." Michael said nothing. That silence was my answer. I walked past him. "Where are you going?" "To the guest room." "Claire." I stopped at the hallway. "I don't know if our marriage can survive this." His face fell. "But I know one thing." I turned around. "I'm not giving your family $1. That night I placed my father's letter in the drawer beside my bed. Then I read it one more time. The final sentence stayed with me. "Don't confuse forgiveness with surrender." I realized my father hadn't left me a weapon. He had left me something better, a warning. And now, for the first time, I was ready to find out exactly who had planned to take what he left me. The next morning I woke before sunrise. That had always been normal for me. Years in the army had trained my body to wake before the alarm, before the neighborhood came alive, before the first commuter cars filled the streets. But that morning felt different. I wasn't waking up for duty. I was waking up because I finally understood that I was in the middle of a battle I had never agreed to fight. I made coffee, put my hair into a tight bun, and sat at the kitchen table with my father's letter beside me. Then I made a decision. I wasn't going to confront Evelyn. Not yet. I wasn't going to accuse Michael. Not yet. I was going to let them believe I was confused. My father had taught me something during my first leadership course. When you don't understand the enemy's objective, he had told me, don't rush forward. Give them room to reveal it. So I did exactly that. At 9 that morning, I called Evelyn. She answered almost immediately. "Claire." Her voice sounded pleasant, almost relieved. "I've been thinking about yesterday," I said. "I knew you would. I don't want there to be conflict between us. That makes 2 of us." I almost laughed. Instead, I said, "Maybe we should meet." There was a brief pause. "I'd like that." "Lunch." "Of course." We met at a quiet restaurant in Bethesda. Evelyn arrived wearing a cream-colored jacket, pearl earrings, and the expression of a woman who believed she had already won. She hugged me when she saw me. I allowed it. "I'm glad you're being reasonable," she said. I smiled politely. "I've had time to think." She sat across from me. "You're young, Claire. You don't understand how complicated marriage can become when money is involved. I understand that. Michael is your husband." "I know. And your inheritance is substantial. I looked directly at her. How substantial? She smiled. Your father was a very successful man. That isn't what I asked. She leaned closer. $68 million. My heart sank, not because she knew, because she said the exact number. I had never told Michael. I had never told anyone in his family. I folded my hands beneath the table so she wouldn't see my fingers tighten. How did you find out? Evelyn shrugged. People talk. About private trusts, Claire, don't be naive. There it was. The arrogance. The assumption that because she was older, wealthier, and more socially connected, she could talk around the truth. She reached into her purse. I brought something. She placed another document on the table. This is a reasonable arrangement. I didn't touch it. What does it do? It gives Michael authority to manage certain investments. Why? Because you're a military officer. Your career is demanding. I almost smiled. So you think my career makes me incapable of managing my own money? That's not what I said. You implied it. She sighed. I'm trying to protect my son. From what? From being financially excluded from his own marriage. I stared at her. My inheritance existed before I married him. That doesn't mean it shouldn't benefit your husband. Shouldn't it be my decision? She looked irritated. Marriage isn't a business transaction. No, I said quietly. Which is why I'm surprised you're asking me to sign a financial agreement 6 days after my wedding. Her expression hardened. You're making this difficult. No, I'm asking questions. She leaned back. Your father didn't raise you to be selfish. That sentence hit differently. For a moment, I felt anger rise in my chest. Then I remembered his letter. Don't react. I smiled. You're right. She looked pleased. I knew you'd understand. I do understand. I pushed the document back toward her. I understand exactly what you're asking. Her smile disappeared. I won't sign it. She stared at me. Claire, I won't sign anything that gives your family control over my inheritance. You're making a serious mistake. Maybe. I stood. But it's my mistake to make. I left before she could respond. That afternoon I met Robert again. I gave him the document. He read it carefully. This is worse than the first version. How this one contains language that could create arguments about control over inherited assets if you later use them for joint purchases. So they want me to sign something before they know whether I'll agree to anything else. Exactly. I sat back. Can we prove they planned this before the wedding? We may be able to. He opened another file. We found something. He handed me printed emails. One was from Evelyn to Michael. The date was 3 weeks before our wedding. Once you're married, she'll have a harder time saying no. Don't pressure her before the ceremony. I stared at the sentence. Then another message. She trusts you. Use that. I couldn't breathe for a moment. I read it again, then again. Michael had received those messages. And he hadn't shown them to me. Did he respond? Robert nodded. He pointed to the next page. Michael had written, I don't want to hurt her. Evelyn replied, You're not hurting her. You're securing your family's future. I closed my eyes. For one brief moment, I wanted to believe that Michael's message meant he had tried to resist. Then I saw the final response. I'll talk to her after the wedding. My stomach turned. The wedding. The moment when I had stood beside him and promised to love him. The moment when my father had been absent because he was already gone. The moment I had believed I was beginning a new family. They had been planning something behind my back. Before I even walked down the aisle. I looked at Robert. What do I do? Protect yourself legally. And Michael. That depends on whether he continues cooperating with his mother. I nodded. That evening I went home and found Michael waiting in the living room. He looked exhausted. My mother called me, he said. I know. She told me you refused. I did. He sat down. Claire, please. I remained standing. Did you know about the emails? His face went pale. What emails? Don't lie to me. He stared at the floor. I placed copies on the coffee table. He looked at them. His shoulders dropped. I was going to tell you. When, after we settled down? After you got me to sign, no. Then, when he couldn't answer. I felt tears forming, but I refused to let them fall. You let your mother plan this before our wedding. I didn't agree with everything she wanted, but you agreed to wait until after the wedding. He covered his face. I was scared. Of what of losing my family? I nodded slowly. And you thought you could risk losing me instead? He looked up. I love you. I believe you. He looked surprised. But love without courage isn't enough. The room went silent. I picked up my father's letter from the table. My father warned me that people might reveal themselves because of this money. Michael stared at it. I never wanted your money. Then prove it. How? Tell your mother no. He looked terrified. I had my answer. That night I moved my father's letter into a locked drawer. Then I contacted my attorney and asked him to begin formal steps to protect every asset my father had left me. I wasn't filing for divorce. Not yet. I wasn't destroying my marriage. Not yet. But I was done pretending this was a misunderstanding. If Evelyn wanted a fight over my inheritance, she had chosen the wrong woman, because I wasn't going to fight her with anger. I was going to fight her with facts. And the next document we uncovered would prove that the plan against me was much bigger than I had imagined. The document arrived on a Tuesday morning. Robert called me while I was getting ready for work. Claire, I need you to come in. His voice was different. Not frightened. Serious. What happened? We found something connected to Michael. I was silent for a moment. I'm coming. I drove into Washington through the morning traffic, my mind running through every possibility. By then I had stopped expecting good news. Still I wasn't prepared for what Robert placed on his desk. It was a financial agreement. Not the one Evelyn had brought to my house. Not the one she had tried to get me to sign at lunch. This was something different. It was an internal agreement between Michael and a company called Carter Family Holdings. I read the first page, then the second. My hands began to shake. What is this? Robert folded his hands. Your husband's family owns several commercial properties. They've been carrying significant debt for years. I know. This agreement was prepared before your wedding. I looked at him. What does it say? Robert pointed to a section near the bottom. It outlines how certain debts would be paid if additional capital became available to the family. I kept reading. Then I saw my name. Not as a beneficiary, not as an owner, as a potential source of funds. My stomach turned. They plan to use my inheritance to pay these debts. Robert nodded. That's what it appears to show. I looked at the date. 3 weeks before my wedding. 3 weeks. Before Michael stood beside me and promised to build a life together. Before I put a ring on his finger. Before I told him I loved him. They had already discussed my money. I pushed the document away. Does Michael's signature appear here? Robert didn't answer immediately. Yes. I closed my eyes. For a few seconds the office disappeared. I was back at the church. I could hear the music. I could see Michael waiting for me. I remembered the way he smiled when he saw me. I remembered thinking, this is the man I can trust. Then I opened my eyes. Can we prove this was connected to my inheritance? We can prove the agreement existed. But not that Michael intended to force me. No, I nodded. That matters. It does. I sat quietly. I wasn't interested in destroying someone simply because I was hurt. I wanted the truth, and I wanted to protect myself. That afternoon I went home. Michael was there. He was sitting at the kitchen table with his head in his hands. When he saw me, he stood. Claire! I placed the agreement on the table. He looked at it. His face changed immediately. Where did you get that, your family records? He stared at the document. You weren't supposed to see that. I felt something inside me go completely still. That's your first response. He closed his eyes. I didn't mean it like that. How did you mean it? I was going to tell you. You've said that before. He sat down. I remained standing. Did you sign this? Sign this, yes? The word was barely audible. I nodded. Why? My mother pressured me. You're a grown man. I know, you had a choice, I know. Then why? He looked at me. Because I thought if I didn't help, my parents would lose everything. And you thought I should pay for it. No, but that's what the agreement says. I never expected you to actually give us $68 million. I stared at him. Then what did you expect? He swallowed. Maybe a few million. The words hit me harder than a shout. A few million. As if it were nothing. As if the money had no meaning because my father had earned it. As if my life had suddenly become a bank account. I sat across from him. How much did your mother tell you she needed? About $4 million? And how much did she expect to get from me? I don't know. You signed an agreement without knowing. Knowing, he looked away. I nodded slowly. That's the problem, Michael. He looked back. You weren't just manipulated by your mother. You participated. Tears filled his eyes. I know. For the first time, he didn't defend himself. He didn't blame Evelyn. He didn't tell me I was overreacting. He simply sat there. And somehow that made the betrayal feel more real. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. It's my mother. Answer it. He hesitated. Put it on speaker. He looked nervous. But he answered. Mom, Evelyn's voice came through immediately. Did she sign? Michael looked at me. No. There was a pause. Then Evelyn said something that made my blood run cold. Then you need to make her understand what happens if she doesn't cooperate. I reached for the phone. I'm listening. Silence. Claire. Yes. Her voice changed. You shouldn't be listening to private family conversations. You called my husband about my money. Because you're being unreasonable. No, I'm being careful. You don't understand what your father would have wanted. That sentence made me angry. You didn't know my father. I knew his reputation. You knew nothing about him. She became defensive. Your father was a powerful man. He understood that families support one another. My father also believed people should earn what they receive. She hung up. Michael stared at the phone. I looked at him. That's the last time she uses you to speak to me. He nodded. I know. No. You need to decide something. What your mother or our marriage. His face crumpled. Claire, I am not asking you to abandon your family. Then, what are you asking? I'm asking you to stop allowing your family to use our marriage as a financial strategy. He sat quietly for a long time. Finally he said, I'll tell her no. I wanted to believe him. But words weren't enough anymore. The following week, our attorneys arranged mediation. Evelyn arrived with her lawyer. Michael arrived alone. That small detail told me something had changed. The mediator explained that the purpose wasn't to determine ownership of my inheritance. That was already clear. The purpose was to resolve the financial dispute and establish boundaries. Evelyn immediately accused me of turning her son against her. I didn't respond. Robert placed the documents on the table. Bank records, emails, the financial agreement, the attempted trust inquiry. The mediator read everything carefully. Then she looked at Evelyn. Mrs. Carter, why was this agreement prepared before the marriage? Evelyn shifted in her chair. It was simply a precaution. Why was Ms. Morgan's inheritance referenced? She was going to become part of our family. The mediator looked at Michael. Did you sign this? Yes. Did your wife know about it before the wedding? No. The room became silent. Michael looked at me. I was wrong. I believed him. Not because of the words. Because for the first time he was willing to say them in front of everyone. Evelyn's expression hardened. This is ridiculous. She has $68 million, and you're all acting as though she is the victim. I looked at her. I never asked you for anything. She opened her mouth. I continued. I didn't take your house. I didn't take your business. I didn't take your son's money. I paused. You came after mine. No one spoke. And in that silence I finally understood what my father had meant. The money hadn't changed anyone. It had simply removed the mask. Months later, I realized the hardest part had not been protecting the $68 million. It had been deciding what to do with the people who had tried to take it. The mediation ended without Evelyn receiving $1. My inheritance remained legally separate, exactly as my father's estate plan intended. The Carter family's debts remained their responsibility, and Michael formally withdrew from the agreement he had signed before our wedding. But legal victory did not make everything feel better. Michael understood that I couldn't answer them quickly. He moved into a small apartment about 20 minutes from our house. We were still married but separated. He didn't demand that I come back, he didn't ask me for money, and perhaps most importantly, he stopped making excuses for his mother. A few weeks after the mediation, Michael called me. "What is it?" "My mother wants me to challenge the trust. Are you going to?" "No," I told her, "I'm done." I sat quietly. "Why are you telling me?" "Because I should have told you everything before." His voice cracked. "I was afraid of my mother. I spent my whole life trying to keep her happy. I thought if I kept everyone calm, somehow nobody would get hurt. Someone did get hurt, I know. I'm sorry. I appreciate you saying that," I told him. "But we're not going back to normal. I understand. And if we ever have a future, it has to be different. It will be." Over the next several months, I watched. Michael separated his finances from his parents. He refused to co-sign another loan for his family. He told Evelyn that my inheritance was not available to them. When she became angry, he didn't call me to mediate. He handled it himself. Meanwhile, I returned to my military duties. There was something comforting about putting on my uniform again. In the Army, responsibilities were clear. You were accountable for your decisions. One afternoon, Robert called me about a proposal. My father's estate could fund a charitable foundation supporting military families, veterans transitioning into civilian life, and families dealing with financial exploitation. My father had spent his life serving others. I didn't want his final legacy to be a number sitting quietly in an account. So I created the Morgan Family Service Foundation. Part of the inheritance went toward scholarships for children of military families and financial education programs for young service members. One program focused specifically on estate planning, why couples should discuss money honestly, and, most importantly, how to recognize financial manipulation. I learned something I wish someone had taught me earlier. Financial abuse doesn't always look like someone stealing your credit card. Sometimes it looks like a loving relative saying, "We're family." Sometimes it sounds like, "If you really loved us, you'd help." And sometimes it arrives wearing a suit and carrying a legal folder. A few months later, Michael and I agreed to attend counseling. During our first session, our counselor asked us a difficult question. Do you want to save your marriage, or do you simply want to stop feeling guilty about ending it? Neither of us answered immediately. Finally, I said, I want to know whether we can build something honest. Michael nodded. So do I. We spent months learning how to talk about money without fear. We discussed boundaries, family expectations, our careers, and our future. But Michael kept showing up. He never asked me to forget what happened. He never said, "That was my mother, not me." Instead, he said, "I made my own choices." Evelyn never apologized. Eventually, she stopped contacting me directly. One autumn afternoon, almost a year after the day she first appeared at my door, I drove to Arlington National Cemetery. My father was buried there. I wore my dress uniform. The cemetery was quiet. Leaves moved across the grass in the cold wind. I stood beside his grave for a long time. Then I finally said, "Dad, you were right. The money didn't change people. It revealed them." But as I stood there, I realized something else. My father had taught me how to protect what he left me. Life had taught me something he couldn't teach me: how to decide who deserved another chance. I had spent months thinking revenge meant making Evelyn feel the pain she had caused me. It didn't. The greatest revenge was refusing to become bitter. I simply protected myself, told the truth, and walked away from manipulation. And I gave Michael the chance to prove that he could become a better man. Eventually, we renewed our vows. Before we exchanged rings, Michael looked at me. "I don't deserve another chance because I apologized," he said. "I only deserve it if I spend the rest of my life earning your trust." I smiled. "Then let's start there." When I placed the ring on his finger, I didn't feel like I was erasing the past. That was the real inheritance my father left me. Not $68 million. He left me the courage to protect myself, the discipline to wait for the truth, and the wisdom to understand that forgiveness does not require surrender. If there is one thing I hope you take from my story, let it be this: protect what you've worked for, but don't let fear turn your heart into a fortress. Talk openly about money before marriage. Put important agreements in writing. Seek independent legal and financial advice when something feels wrong. And never let anyone convince you that saying no makes you selfish. Sometimes no is how you protect your future. Sometimes no is how you protect your family. And sometimes no is the first honest word you have spoken in years. My father thought he was leaving me $68 million. But in the end, he left me something worth far more. He taught me how to recognize character when money was on the table. And that lesson has stayed with me every day since. If this story touched something in you, take a moment to think about the people in your own life who have stood beside you when there was nothing to gain. If you know someone who needs this reminder about boundaries, trust, or protecting their future, share this story with them. And if you enjoy stories about courage, family second chances, and finding strength after betrayal, consider subscribing and staying with me for the next story. Thank you for listening. Remember, protect your peace, value your character, and never confuse forgiveness with surrender.